All right, welcome to Cbus Mod. This is your host, Allison Harrison. I am here with Ken Schneck from Buckeye Flame. Ken, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Ken Schneck. I'm editor of the Buckeye Flame, and the Buckeye Flame stands as Ohio's only LGBTQ plus newsroom and one of only a handful of statewide LGBTQ newsrooms left in the country.
Awesome. How long have you been the editor at Buckeye Flame?
I have been the editor since we created the whole gosh darn thing. We came up with the idea in March of 2020, and the website was up and running by June of 2020. So we are in our fifth year.
What a time to start a business when the world was shutting down for the plague.
That actually so much informed us launching. So it was a time when LGBTQ plus people across Ohio couldn't physically gather. So that was an element of what was happening at the time. And also at the same time, there was a previous LGBTQ statewide publication that went under because of the pandemic. So when it went under that day, I was actually the editor of that publication when it went under. I should say it in the positive way. The positive way is saying Ohio has to have an LGBTQ plus publication. But the way that I often say it and feel deeply is Ohio can't not have an LGBTQ publication, both during the pandemic and also because of everything that we navigate here in the state of Ohio. The pandemic was actually quite instrumental in launching the Buckeye Flame. I don't know that we would exist without it.
I mean, that's fair. The updates that you're giving with the state house legislation right now are amazing because that is changing so rapidly. To have one place to go that says, hey, they're going to, at least give us the high level what's happening.
Yeah, we are really dedicated to it. It's something that has certainly developed over time, this idea of legislative literacy, this idea that there are things that are happening in the Columbus State House that absolutely have real world effects on your LGBTQ life. And so what is it that we can do to break down the barriers so that people are aware, but also not be clickbaity, right? Like we don't want to be out there saying, you should be freaking out about this when
Right.
I don't know that you should be. That one's not as important and it's probably not going anywhere. So chill out.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's sometimes like breaking down the intimidation of legislation? Because I think of like as a lawyer, a lot of what we do is like break down the intimidation of working with us, right? I think the legislature feels like a different level of scary.
Yeah, and let's be clear, I watched every episode of Matlock growing up, so I'm obviously a lawyer as well. Yeah, and that is a lens, by the way, that I bring to it. Not so much the Matlock, but the fact that I'm not a lawyer. So, and I'm the only non-lawyer in my family, which my parents don't like to talk about. But this idea that yeah, there's legislative language, and what does that actually mean? There's a bill that's moving through the State House very rapidly right now that has kind of a catchphrase to it. And everyone's like, oh, this is the Don't Say Gay bill. And when you read the bill, well, no, that's not exactly what that bill is. So I love the idea of making things accessible, but also walking that tightrope of not dumbing it down to the point where it's not accurate. It's still got to be accurate in what's actually happening.
No, that's great. So outside of politics, if someone has never heard of the Buckeye Flame, what are they going to find in the Flame?
Yeah, we really are hyper focused. I say all the time, we are predictably and reliably and relentlessly and obnoxiously on brand. And our brand is LGBTQ plus Ohio. If it doesn't have to do with LGBTQ plus Ohio, it doesn't run on our site. There are a number of national LGBTQ issues. And quite frankly, there are other newsrooms out there that are much more resourced than we are. They can handle it. We write about it insofar as it affects LGBTQ plus Ohioans, in the same way that there are a lot of Ohio issues that don't necessarily have an LGBTQ plus angle. So that's not something that we publish. So we are really focused on, first and foremost, the 557,000 LGBTQ adults in Ohio and their families, which bumps that up, so much more. And because there's not a lot of data about how many LGBTQ youth are out there, they are certainly part of our demographic as well, though we probably need to do more video content to reach them. So that's really what they're going to find. Yeah. I would also say the other big piece for us is that we're an all queer newsroom. So we're approaching these issues. It's great that our colleagues at other publications and legacy publications are covering LGBTQ issues, but we know that they're not doing it with sensitivity, grace, and depth all the time. They're both sidesing an issue that there aren't two sides to conversion therapy. There's no reason that you need to quote this protester who's saying demonstrably horrible things about the LGBTQ plus community. So you're finding a different angle, even in issues that other publications are covering as well.
Yeah. Do you think it lends yourself to more authenticity because you said it's a queer newsroom covering queer issues, right?
We know our stuff. We know our stuff, even as we are not everything. We have so much more work to do to make sure that we are covering, as someone who is in my other life, a professor of racial justice, we have so much work to do to make sure that we are covering queer Ohio issues of color. So yeah, a lot more work to do, but our baseline is much different than you're going to see probably in your local publication.
Yeah. All right. So you've been around for 5 years. What has that journey from I have this concept I want to do to today you send out this newsletter to hundreds of thousands of people?
I do wish it was hundreds of thousands of people. We're going to get there, but tens of thousands. Yeah, I love it. That was great manifesting 2025. I think that the importance of what we're doing has really fueled us along. And really, we spent the first year and change building proof of concept. We very intentionally started as a nonprofit, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be focused on finances. So that if nonprofit means broke, you're a bad nonprofit.
I help so many nonprofits, and I'm like, nonprofit doesn't mean you don't make money. It just means you're taxed differently. You have to make money as a nonprofit. That's how you continue operating and doing great work.
Yeah. And so we've been very clear from the very start, and even telling in the advertising space, hey, folks, if you want to reach an LGBTQ plus Ohio audience, it really is just us. And so that's okay to say that's opportunistic. Yeah, we're a nonprofit. You actually need to be opportunistic to stay alive. So part of what has fueled us is, again, what I mentioned is knowing that this can't fold. With no other LGBTQ publications in the state, and given that this is a state where the LGBTQ plus community from a very baseline does not have legal protections in the areas of housing and public accommodations and employment, that's just the baseline. And then you add on top of that all of the bills that keep coming to further restrict the lived experience of LGBTQ plus Ohioans, starting from a place of we have to exist, actually does fuel things along and probably enables us to take some bold swings that we might not without that sense of urgency. So started with this really tiny investment from an angel investor. I mean, we're talking $5,000 just to get us started, and then spent a good year and change just building proof of concept and saying, here's the impact that we're having. Here's a nonprofit that after our article was swamped with donations of clothing that they desperately needed. Here is the number of registrants for an AIDS walk. Here is the name of a murdered Black trans woman who was not on anyone's lips and was not on the list, the national list for Trans Day of Remembrance that was sent out, that now is on this list, right? What a horrible reason for their name to be known. But this did happen, and so their name should be on that list.
They should be honored.
And it is now. Her name is on that list because of an article that we posted. So really showing what impact is, trying not to rely on, I will tell you, big evolution is me not refreshing the metrics.
It's so tempting.
Allison, tempting is not the word you want to use for what I was doing. Obsessive, it would put it mildly. And I got to tell you, I barely check them at all right now because that's not how we measure impact. So that's been a really wonderful evolution of what we've been doing. And after we really spent some time doing proof of concept, we had a foundation who came to my local coffee shop where I sit here in Cleveland and just said, hey, can we sit with you for a minute? Yep, absolutely. And they said, hey, what would it look like if we gave you $100,000? That would look great. You should do that. And that really launched us to being able to build a staff and know, where we want to go. We don't want to scale just to scale, which is, I know, the downfall of so many nonprofits and so many businesses, small businesses. But we do know that we want to add another reporter who focuses exclusively on LGBTQ plus Ohioans of color. We do want to add a reporter who focuses solely on queer joy. That's really important because people eat up those stories.
That's growth, but it's strategic growth. It's not growth for the sake of growth. And that's what I think, Yeah, is a very big difference. You can grow and it sucks, or you can grow and it can be amazing.
Yeah. And we need a development person. And
Yeah.
that's going to happen in 2025.
All right. I love it. I love it. But I want to go back to something else you said. So you
Please.
started this with $5,000,
Yeah.
right? So we help startups, and I talk to people or just in my friend circle. They're like, "Oh, you have to have so much money to start a business," and I'm like, I mean, I started my law firm with like a laptop and maybe $3,000, and that was to pay my mortgage that was coming due like the next month. But so you can bootstrap it, right? Like that's what I'm hearing from you is if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and put in the work, you can get something off the ground so that then you can generate that revenue.
I would also add if you have your elevator pitch tight, right? And so this idea of these folks that are trying to do all the things, we weren't trying to do all the things. At the very beginning, we were told, make sure that you cover LGBTQ issues outside of Ohio. No. Make sure that you cover Ohio issues that aren't necessarily LGBTQ. No. Make sure you start a podcast on day one. Absolutely not. A video cast. Nope. Here's what we're doing. And so that elevator pitch, right? Those 75 to 90 words that establish your sense of urgency, present your solution, and specifically ask someone to help you in a very specific way.
Yeah.
That is how you bootstrap it. It's also how people recommend you. It's easy for folks to tell others about the Buckeye Flame. We are Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. Might we have other offerings coming up? Sure, but they're always going to be an offshoot of that. So if you have a law firm of all queer people, that's really easy to tell other people about. But if you are, oh, I do everything, cool, I will probably recommend you for nothing.
We have to be memorable. Like that's very much, I have this thing. I don't always remember folks' names because I can't connect them to a story. And so like, if you can give me something that's memorable about you, I'll remember who you are. But otherwise, the chance that I remember your name is, it's really small. And I think, and what you said, that's an elevator pitch, but that's also a mission and vision. You have
100%.
a very clear mission and vision.
Yeah, and ours are really connected. A lot of times you're seeing, and again, my professor had of teaching about organizational theory, that the mission and vision are vastly different things. They shouldn't be. Our mission is to amplify LGBTQ plus voices, and our vision is to be the most known LGBTQ plus publication in Ohio. Done.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm going to ask you a different question because I think this is always interesting. So you open this and you're like, there's no LGBTQ newspaper, but there's a lot of other LGBTQ nonprofits in Cleveland and Cincinnati and Columbus and throughout the state. And so like, how were you like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to like fight through this noise? What was kind of your thought process on knowing I have all these other organizations that kind of do similar things in this space, just not the same way?
Yeah, that's been hard. And I don't get to talk about this part enough. And this is also where I might piss some people off, and I'm okay with that. And you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, convincing other LGBTQ organizations that we are not their PR office. That has been really hard for us because there's been these expectations of, well, this is how you're going to cover what we're doing and this is how often you're going to do it. There's an LGBTQ organization, I'll just say in Ohio, in Cleveland, who really sent me quite a nasty email last week and said, you have not written enough about us. I'm like, wait, we just did a huge feature on you a couple months ago. And they said, yeah, but now we've done this. There are tons of LGBTQ organizations across the state. So I think the journalism piece is what sets us apart, knowing that we exist, which is both a positive and a negative, especially on the funding side. If we're being crass, like on the positive side, there aren't other LGBTQ organizations doing journalism in Ohio. And so we really are approaching it from that lens as a news organization. That said, do you pursue funding that's journalism? Do you pursue LGBTQ plus funding? Do you pursue arts and entertainment? There's an organization, a foundation that gives hundreds of thousands of dollars to LGBTQ organizations in Northeast Ohio for public health reasons. And for public health initiatives. And we approached them and they said, no, you don't do public health. And we're like, yeah, but do you understand that people wouldn't know about the public health stuff if not for us? We're the ones writing about the initiatives that you're funding. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult and you gotta, again, to cut through that noise. And I know that I'm relentless on this as well. That elevator pitch has to be specific and memorable.
Yeah. I mean, I think for any industry, right? It's so true. If you can't in 30 seconds tell me what it is you
I'm
do,
out.
yeah. I talk with other lawyers. We do consultations, try and figure out how we can help people. Mine are 15 minutes. Everyone's like, well, how can you figure it out in 15 minutes? If you can't articulate a problem to me in 15 minutes so that I can at least have a high level understanding of what's going on, I can't help you.
Right. And we know the drawback is also that a lot of these organizations chase the funds. And I get that. I get the temptation to chase the money that's out there. But if the money is off brand for what you're doing, your organization is toast. When I first moved to Cleveland in 2013, I joined a non-LGBTQ organization because the board of one, because I wanted to see what non-gay stuff was like. And it was a very distinct organization that went off mission and chased funding and became something completely different. And the organization pretty much is folded at this point because you lost your identity there, friends.
It's tempting because you see that ability to grow. But again, it's not strategic growth. It's just growth.
Right. And that comes up even in the space of, look, I could retire early if I decided to take sports betting money advertising for the Buckeye Flame, right? Like that, I'm offered it every other hour, truly, but that's not what we do. And once we do that, this is a big conversation too around, do you take advertising money from political candidates? And we really debate that because I don't know that we want to open that door, because then we have to take it from all of the political candidates, and that would not be great for us.
Well, right. It doesn't fit in your mission, vision,
Exactly.
values of Buckeye Flame, which it's so refreshing to hear because it's so easy and so tempting to go the other direction, to be like, oh, well, but this is the path of less resistance because it's quick and easy versus
it's where the money is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're sticking to it. How do you help fuel this strategic growth? Like, do you have meetings with your team and your editors, or how are you able to do that?
Yeah, so we are a scrappy little nonprofit newsroom. And so we have a board, as any nonprofit would, of 13 folks from across the state. And we are certainly, like many nonprofits, navigating what does it mean to have the most contributing and valuable board that you can have. And we are in the middle of those conversations, always trying to figure that out. Even though we launched the website in June of 2020, when we had the idea on that Friday in March of 2020, we had a board within a week. So the board was really integral to where we started. We've since really grown our staff. We have 2 full-time writers and myself. We have a staff writer, and we also have the only, until someone tells me I'm lying, and then I'll stop saying it, but it hasn't happened yet. We have the only rural LGBTQ plus beat reporter in the country. There is no other outlet that is devoted to having a rural LGBTQ beat, and that's really important to us.
That is.
So we were remote for a few years, and then a space opened up in my local neighborhood here in Cleveland. I'm pointing to it because it's literally 0.28 miles from my house, which is kind of awesome. And it was really affordable. And we thought, all right, let's just put out for our birthday, which is June of every year, let's just put out a request to folks if they want to help fund this. And I was hoping, my gosh, Allison, if we could get 2 months worth of rent and utilities, I would have been thrilled beyond belief. We put out 2 emails and we raised 2 years of rent and utilities.
That's amazing.
Being physically in the same space and gathering together has helped a lot. I don't know that I'm the best remote supervisor. I don't know that I'm great at that, honestly. And so being able to see my staff and have these conversations and vibe with each other. And on the other side of the wall of us is Plexus, which is the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. So it's just,
for me.
She's my best buddy. And so being able to see these folks and just bounce ideas off of each other, that's really key for us. So yeah, with all respect to people who are pulling this off so enormously well remotely, being able to physically gather and talk through stories has helped us a lot.
Yeah. I mean, there's a different skill set that is with remote management. And so, but how long were you remote before you became in person? Because that's still a while of you doing great things well.
Yeah, it was definitely 3 years. It was definitely 3 years, and I choose not to think about that. We did really, really well. And quite frankly, look, for the first year and change, it was just me and freelancers and the board. And I choose not to think about those times either. I can't even wrap my mind around that. yeah, growing, but in a way that's sustainable and really networking with other journalists. I'm very fortunate that I get to be a part of a lot of consortia across the country for journalists. And when they've heard of us, I'm like, what are you talking about? So we've received some really lovely recognition. Our staff writer was named the National LGBTQ Journalist of the Year this year, which was a
That's
huge deal,
amazing.
and got this
Congratulations to them.
huge plaque, which is lovely. Except that I will just say that 3 years ago, I was the National LGBTQ Journalist of the Year, and my plaque was half the size. But whatever, it's not about the size of the plaque, Allison.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I will share this with you because I also have the same FOMO. I play in the Gay and Lesbian Tennis Association. They have a tournament in Columbus. Do you ever come down?
Tennis instructor. How have we not played tennis together? This is going to be a big part of our lives. Yes.
We will have to do this. But I won it one year and they gave me like this plate, which is great. Okay. The next year they came up with a shoe. It's like a high heel shoe that's like scarlet and gray and it's super fun. It also holds a bottle of wine. And I was like, man, I want a plate.
The shoe.
Shoe. So now I have to win again so I can get the shoe.
All right. Well, if there's a mixed doubles portion, we got this.
They don't do mixed doubles, but we always play in the men's because they don't have a women's division in Columbus's tournament. So it's just kind of all gendered, which I think is better anyhow. So come to Columbus and play.
Got it.
Okay. I don't know what we were talking about with your business. Let's
started out with bootstraps, definitely built it up. Things were great the first couple of years. I'm not saying they weren't. Our capacity has increased dramatically, being in the same physical space and having more staff. It just has.
What is like the biggest takeaway that you've learned from the 5 years of growth, from bootstrapping to full staff in office?
I hate being so repetitive, but the temptations to stray from what we do are daily. They really are. Hey, franchise this in other states. Hey, take this money. Hey, I'm telling you, they're daily. And as a human being, of which I am, who's going through a career transition, those temptations are really tempting. It's right there in the title of the word temptation. And so staying on brand for us has been it really has been the biggest takeaway. My elevator pitch has not changed since day one. Some of our action steps have, but who we are and what we do has not changed.
So thinking of the franchising model, do you think you could duplicate the magic that you have in Ohio in another state?
I don't think I could. And I think that's the key piece. I think it really does take I built up, I would like to think, some cultural capital here in Ohio before we started this. That said, I moved here in 2013. I am legit not from the Midwest. And so I think that it's still doable. And I'd like to say that we've done pretty well, even with this gay Jew from New Jersey doing what I do here. I think that the model of it and as modestly as we started is a great way to do it. That said, statewide is challenging. I think adding this rural component has been huge for us because the issues of Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, and to the same degree, but maybe a little bit lesser, Toledo, Dayton, right?
We focus on the major cities, not
right.
Ohio.
And by the way, Parma somewhere in there. I think Parma's like in the top 10 most populated. We haven't written about them once. I'm obsessed with the fact that we've not written a gay Parma story yet. But we also know that in tracking counties, we've hit. So there are 88 counties in Ohio. We have hit 53 of the 88, which that's actually not
big.
It's pretty big, but by my math, there's 35 counties that have LGBTQ plus Ohioans living in them that we haven't written about at all. And we've written a few thousand stories at this point. So it is challenging being a statewide publication and navigating all the different pieces. How do you make someone in Akron care about this thing that's happening in Lebanon? Right. And how do you pronounce some of these cities as well?
And first you have to find it on a map and then you got to pronounce it to care.
I love that I know where New Richmond is now, because how do we make people in Youngstown care that a teacher last month in New Richmond, Ohio, right, tiny little place, was suspended for 3 days without pay because she has 4 books in her classroom library, her third grade classroom library, that has LGBTQ plus characters. If that story only appeals to New Richmond, we're not doing what we set out to do. So that's solutions journalism is one way to approach that. Like, what are the lessons here? If we're saying something that this law firm is doing in Athens, can it be replicated in Salina, Ohio? That's what we really care about. If it's just so specific to this area, that's not going to work.
Yeah, no, I mean, that seems like an uphill challenge, really. It seems so straightforward at your face. You're like, oh, you report on LGBTQ issues. But when you dive into it, you're like, oh no, this is actually really difficult because you've got urban issues, right? You've got our major cities, and then you have our rural towns, and sometimes there's a disconnect, right? You said
Indeed.
You're not from Ohio, but I think it's always interesting when I meet people who are truly from Cleveland or Columbus, and they've never really gone to the rest of Ohio. I'm always like, oh, it's different. It's different. I grew up in a very small town of 5,000 people, and now I live in Columbus, and if I go home, it's wildly different than when I'm in Columbus.
It was a big deal for us on this. When we launched in 2020, there were a couple elements on the site that persist to this day and will never go away. One was a link for people to submit a story, because we want to know what's going on in your neck of the woods. And so getting story tips from Salina, from Toledo, from Dayton, that's huge for us. We might not have heard about it. And there's a lot of stories. We might not always have the capacity to cover it. And it wrenches my heart. I can't tell you my list of stories that I want to get to. We just don't have the capacity right this second. So that's a big piece. The other piece, which is a little bit controversial in the journalism world, is it right there on our homepage. It says steal our stories. Other sites, we will never be behind a paywall. We are committed to that. We do need always funding help from folks to make sure that is always the case, right? We will never be behind a paywall, and we will always encourage anyone and everyone to republish our content. There are some other sites that allow you to republish their content, but you have to use their specific code so they can track. Yeah, we don't know how to do any of that yet. So none of that is the case.
The whole bootstrapping.
Yeah, exactly. We would rather you cut and paste what it is that we're doing and republish it in your publication than publish some of the LGBTQ plus crap that you were publishing before you read our pieces. There is one publication in Ohio that I think would say they have an LGBTQ beat reporter. They 100% don't. They're just republishing our stuff all the time, which is fine. I just have these moments of like, okay, you could give us a little bit of kickback, but that's okay. That's not why we do it. Right, I'm not taking my toys and going home. So yeah, it's really key to us that people support us by supplying stories. And then, our next frontier is really leaning into people supporting us as a nonprofit. It's called reader revenue. And that is going to be key to just try to up the number of people who are giving. This is big, right? Like, you need to be thinking about the financial pieces. And I'm very open about this. There are 557,000 LGBTQ adults in Ohio. If we can get half of 1% of them, half of 1% donating at our lowest level, our lowest monthly level, which is $12.50 a month, half of 1% at $12.50 a month, we are sustainable like you have no idea.
Oh, that's
being able to
powerful.
Articulate that is important because it feels doable. But we also know where we are. We're about 10% there towards that 0.5%. And so again, nonprofits or small businesses, you have to have a command of what these goals are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll make sure in our show notes, there's all the information on how you can subscribe and donate and submit articles. We'll make sure that's all covered. Ken, this has been a blast. We always end the pod with one question. If you were to talk to anyone who wants to start a business, what is the one single piece of advice you would give them before they commit to it?
You have to have a command of your sense of urgency. There has to be because we already talked about, there's so much noise out there. Attention spans are really short. There has to be a sense of urgency of why this business must exist. Because right now, someone's not doing the thing that you want to do, right? Like, they're not shopping at your place. They're not using your services. They're not reading your publication. You need to very succinctly, right? So clearly and succinctly be able to cut through the noise and say, here's how it would make your life better in some way, either through an additional opportunity or reducing a pain point by engaging with what it is that I do. That's a sense of urgency. For the most part, humans, we don't like changing. What you're asking with a new small business is for someone to change. Right now, someone isn't hiring you as a lawyer and you want them to. That's a change. You just need to be able to convince them why it's important that you do, and know that it's okay that you're not the only lawyer. You're not the only queer lawyer. You're not the only queer lawyer in Columbus. So how is it that you specifically set yourself apart to start a small business in a way that is a sense of urgency for someone to say, you know what, I'm going to take a chance? Because even when things suck for people, they stick with the thing that sucks because the next thing, the new thing might be worse. So how do we grease the wheels? And for me, I always answer that is, what is the sense of urgency in engaging what you are there to offer?
I feel like I just sat through one of your college lectures. That was very well articulated. Thank you, Ken.
Happily. And thank you for this platform to do this.
Of course, we want to help any small business, minority-owned business amplify their voice. So we're helping Buckeye Flame, and we'll make sure that it appears on all our social, all the things, so that you can hopefully get closer to that 0.5%.
And that's your sense of urgency for the podcast, right? Like people are just, I'm just going to start a podcast. Great. If you actually do want people to listen to it, there needs to be that tagline sense of urgency of why they should, because you're not the only podcast out there. So yeah, exactly what you said. I love this.
Oh, thank you, Ken, very much.
Tennis Champions 2025. We're going to win the boot.